Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara Cam. That is me, the senior writer for the News Service of Florida. I am sad to say that I am still coming at you from the Lafayette Park Rehabilitation Center, but I am out of the wheelchair and I'm hobbling around with the use of my magenta walker. So, TMI? Could be not. Stick with us. We have a special guest today. Congressman Maxwell Alejandro Frost, who is the first Gen Zer to be elected to Congress. He is the first Afro-Cuban member of Congress. He is from Central Florida, and he is the rock star of Democratic politics right now in the country.
So I'm not sure how, playing nice with DeSantis up there is going to give us anything except, boots on our faces.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with me, Dara Cam. And we are so super excited today to have a special guest, Congressman Maxwell Alejandro Frost, who is making history, made history in Florida, made history in Congress, and is a thing all around the country. So welcome, Congressman Frost, to Deeper Dive.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be here.
Let's dig right in. You are now the ripe old age of 26. You were 25, I think, when you were sworn into Congress. You were the first member of Gen Z to be elected to Congress, and the first, according to your page, Afro-Cuban, the first Afro-Cuban member of Congress. I was reading a Vogue profile of you that said you exploded into an overnight political superstar, a personification of hope that the kids are all right. And they're saying some really crazy, wild, positive things about you, and you certainly are an outlier as far as Florida is concerned, because and I want you to talk to us a little bit about how you and your cohorts, age-wise, helped block a Republican red wave everywhere but basically your home state. How did that happen?
I think what really happened, and thank you so much for having me on, by the way, is that people saw all the good work that's been done over the last 2 years. I mean, think about the big pieces of legislation that have been passed that people have seen the result of it immediately, from the American Rescue Plan, stimulus checks, the Inflation Reduction Act, which puts a record number of dollars behind the climate crisis, and all the money that went through to all the municipalities, states, countywide government that resulted in bonuses and unemployment going down, et cetera. And I think people really felt it back at home. And really, at the end of the day, that's the crux of the message here that helped prevent the red wave and is the path towards Democrats continuing to be able to win and hopefully, get to a place where we take the House next cycle, is showing people that government can work for them. I mean, that's what you want to do, right? When you are the party or you're the person in charge, you want to do everything you can to help working families, but do that by showing them that government could actually result in material change that's helpful for them in their life. And I think that's part of the reason why we didn't see a huge red wave.
So here in Florida, though, you see what's happening. I mean, I'm watching your tweets and your other social media, but particularly on Twitter, you've been commenting a lot on what's going on here. I mean, we have Governor DeSantis, who probably is going to run for president. He hasn't announced yet, but certainly appears to be poised to do that. We have a number of the legislature is considering a number of issues that are sort of antithetical to what you're talking about more, there's the crusade against transgender people and transgender children. They're moving backwards, possibly on some of the gun law, one of the very few gun safety restrictions that was passed in Florida in the past number of decades. And I want to ask you what your thoughts are about that would lower the age from 21 to 18 for long guns purchase. That is something that the legislature passed in the weeks following the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School mass shooting, that horrific event. And you were the co-leader of, I was talking to David Hogg from March for Our Lives, and he had some wonderful praise that he heaped on you a couple days ago. And you helped to organize that organization into what it is today. What are your thoughts on where your home state is headed?
Yeah, it's a big question. And what I always encourage people to do is, look at the landscape and look at the actions of this governor. And when you see it, and you see, every day there's a new bill, every day there's a new executive action where he's targeting marginalized communities, because I guess polls are telling him that doing this and, doing an attack on Black history and LGBTQ plus folks and trans folks and Black people and immigrants will help him win the Republican primary for president of the United States. And so essentially he's more interested in running for president than running the state. And because of that, we're not seeing them deal with affordable housing or wages or any of the issues that are really impacting working families on a day-to-day basis. He's concerned with these issues that are essentially meant to rev up his base. And it's not just revving up his base. They're passing actual legislation and doing actual actions that will result in harm and in some cases death. And it's important to be really upfront about it and recognize the threat that Governor Ron DeSantis poses to our democracy and to our state. Because our state, in terms of policy, is actually a progressive state. We see this, the numbers prove it time and time again. And what I'm trying to tell people is we have to look at the difference here between politics and policy, because there is a difference between both of those. And the case study for this difference is here in the state of Florida. I'll give you an example. If you look at the ballot initiatives that we've passed, which are purely based on policy, over 60% of Floridians went to the ballot box and said yes to a $15 minimum wage, to voting rights for people with previous felonies, to medical marijuana. I don't know if you recently saw this UNF poll that shows that in a head-to-head matchup between Governor DeSantis and President Biden in the state of Florida, DeSantis wins by a few points. But then they also asked those same people questions about potential ballot initiatives, progressive ballot initiatives like codifying the right to an abortion. And over 70% of those same people said yes to that. So what we see is we have a governor who's been effective at separating his policy from his politics. And that's why when you hear him speak, he's not talking about substantive policy that's going to help people. It's all around this quote unquote culture war or woke or whatever the hell that means, because it's purposeful. He knows his policies are not popular. So what he has to do is make it all about the politics and all about the marketing and the PR. When Democrats, our way to win here is connect these two things again. And we saw Andrew Gillum did a good job of that in his race in 2018. And we saw we came very close, 30,000 votes away from having the governor's mansion. And so when people say, Florida's a red state now, you can call it a red state, you whatever, but like at the end of the day, I don't see an ideological shift of the state where I would say, oh, this is like, Arkansas, where it's just like it's red and there's no hope. Because what we see is in policy, we're progressive, politics, not so much. And that shows me there's a path to victory here at connecting the policy and the politics and telling the story and narrative of policy and how it impacts people in their day-to-day life, how it impacts working people.
Well, that's a very thoughtful response, and I appreciate that. And the problem is that Democrats haven't been able to connect those dots in Florida. You're the exception. Governor DeSantis won by a landslide, 20% margin, in
Yeah.
November. So, I mean, how can Dems step up their game?
It's a lot of things, right? There's not like a silver bullet here. I think the messaging is a big part of it.
Hmm.
I think showing people that you're going to fight for them is important. And I think we have to be unafraid to really hit back. And it's not about hitting back for political points. It's about hitting back to explain the dangers of what's going on right now. I have called because when you look at the book definition of the political ideology of what's called fascism, when you look it up and you read the definition, which is about usually a right wing authoritarian figure that uses the power of the state to silence people who are working against him and political enemies. You look at what Governor DeSantis has done over the past several months, and it fills that definition. And so it is not hyperbole, it is just fact. And I think it's important that we're honest about it. Some Democrats will disagree with me, but at the end of the day, they have a supermajority in the state legislature.
Hmm.
I've spoken with members of both the Senate and the House. They don't get consulted on anything because they don't have to be consulted. So I'm not sure how, playing nice with DeSantis up there is going to give us anything except, you know, boots on our faces.
Mm.
And when voters see that, they don't see people fighting for them. And they also, there's a lot of people in the state who see what's going on and they don't understand how it impacts them. They sit at home, they see the attacks on LGBTQ plus folks, they see the attack on Black history and immigrants, and maybe they're thinking like, okay, but it has nothing to do with me. And our job as Democrats is to tell the story of why it does matter, why our collective freedoms, liberty, and justice are interconnected, and we should want our fellow humans to have the freedoms and liberties they deserve by virtue of being alive, but also pointing out that while DeSantis focuses on issues that really aren't an issue, and he's as far as talking about trans kids and Black history and et cetera, as he makes up these fake issues, he's not helping people with wages. He's not helping with housing. He's not helping with transit. So the things people actually care about are being neglected because he's focused on oppressing marginalized communities. And it's up to us to tell that story. The other part is not just the story and not just the messaging, but how we deliver it. And we have to meet people where they're at. And we have to ensure that we spend our resources wisely. I believe in year round community organizing. You should be in the community all year, not just 3 months before election day,
Hmm.
because when it's time to vote, you want to be in a position where you're just reminding people to go vote and not begging them to vote. And what we saw from Democrats across the state last cycle is it got to week 3 or 4 into early voting, and the alarm bell started going off because
Right.
the numbers were so bad. And what you saw, and for people listening who don't know, you have this period in a campaign that's called GOTV, get out the vote. And the purpose of GOTV is to reach out to your supporters and just logistically remind them, right? And help them with the logistics of going to vote. It's just getting out the vote. But Democrats noticed, oh, well, we still have to persuade people, and so it created a problem of
You
turnout.
can't start persuading people when they're going to the ballot to vote. You have to do that groundwork much earlier.
Exactly. And that's why being in the community year round communication is very, very important and critical to building political power, not just winning elections, but building political power with and for your community. And I think, Central Florida, I think, is the new progressive hub of this state as of last election. And I think we really, have an opportunity to show other cities and other folks what you can build when you have a solid cadre of elected officials who are in tune with the movements and labor and work together year round to provide for people. It builds a level of trust that's needed for governing, but also nice and winning elections, right? Because
Mm.
people come out to vote for you because they know you, they trust you, and you love each other. And that is really what's missing from a lot. The last thing I'll say is we tend to fall for a lot of traps here in Florida. And this isn't really about, and look, I'm a proud progressive, but this is less about ideology and more about falling for the traps that Republican leaders set out for us. I'll give you one example. The one that I heard about the most last year is, they're going to call you socialists. They're going to say defund or whatever,
Right.
whatever they think is going to help their cause. And what ends up happening, number one, whether you're a moderate or you are a progressive, you're going to get called a socialist, a dictator, a communist, no matter what. And what we saw is a lot of Democrats, the Republican would say, oh, they're a socialist, and then the Democrat would spend their whole media budget on a commercial that says, no, I'm not.
I'm not a socialist.
And I'm not a socialist, or no, I'm not, doesn't seem like a message that will get out voters who are struggling. And I would also argue that the people that maybe that Democrat is hoping to appeal to with the no, I'm not messaging is not going to vote for them anyways. So I think it's important that we use our time to talk about what we're for, not what we're against, and not what we're not. And I think a lot of Democrats across the state fell for that trap last year, and all of our messaging was no, I'm not. And I think people at home just want to know, okay, but what are you going to do for me?
It's so interesting what you're saying. I've been writing about these issues and politics in Florida from Tallahassee for as long as you've been alive, probably longer. And that's because I'm an old, like I said. But, and this is a conversation that I've been having with Democratic leaders for 30 years, where the messaging that they've been on their back foot as far as messaging goes, and the Republicans have shaped the narrative in Florida for that long. And that is how they made all these incremental gains and took over majority, now super majorities in both chambers, and have held on to the governor's office for so many decades. So, I hear what you're saying, and you're spot on. And I guess it's a time when, words just have to stop being words, and that has to translate into action if Democrats are going to make gains again in Florida, right?
100%. And it has to be, all my band director used to say this all the time, all the things, all the time, right? That's really what we have to have. Again, there's not one silver bullet. There's not one thing that's going to win us the state next year. I'm not sure we're going to flip the state, but I know we can crush those margins and build the power. And thank God the timeline for change isn't just 2 years, or else we, thank God we have more time. And I think we have to start thinking about that. And that's something that Republican Party is good at. They don't, they will set out a 20-year plan and wait their turn. And they waited, and they flipped Miami-Dade red, and they had a 20-point margin. And one day we woke up, and half of our country didn't have the right to bodily autonomy anymore. Those were 20, 30-year plans. In fact, the whole ground game in Miami, they've been working on that since my mom got here from Cuba in the late 1960s via radio and communication. So you could argue that's a 60 or 70-year plan. So either way, I think, I'm not saying we need to wait 60 or 70 years. We need to go all in.
Right.
I think we can have faster timelines here because we have a message that actually resonates with people and that's actually really popular. So we don't have to wait 70 years. We can do this in a few cycles, but we need to really get our act together in terms of the message, the way we get the message out, the way we organize, and then the last portion, which is where I'll dip into ideology, is the way we legislate. And I think when we legislate in a way that shows people we're fighting for the most, and maybe we won't always get it, and we'll compromise, and that's an important part of governing. But showing up at the table already at the compromise, I think shows a level of weakness that people usually associate with our party, with Democrats. And I think it's time we step away from that.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be right back with Congressman Maxwell Alejandro Frost.
From the team that brought you Deeper Dive with Dara Cam comes a brand new e-newsletter on the Florida man who may be president. Governor Ron DeSantis is his own conservative brand, an unapologetic culture warrior who could run for the White House as early as 2024. The DeSantis Files is your one-stop shop for the best in reporting, analysis, and opinion on the man supporters call America's governor. Delivered straight to your inbox twice a week, learn more by emailing editor@cityandstatefl.com. That's cityandstatefl.com. Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara. We are certainly resonating with the media all around the country, probably internationally for all I know. But I have to tell you that I actually resubscribed to Rolling Stone magazine so that I could read the story about you and look at the pictures. And I have to just say, those pants, OMG, I love those striped pants.
Oh, the rolling, the striped pants.
Yes.
Oh yes, I love the striped pants.
I love
very
those
much.
striped pants.
They're good pants. I forgot where I bought them, but they, I do.
Well,
love.
if you think of it, you text me and let me know, because I'm like, I gotta have a pair of those pants. And you play the drums, right? So you started out in. Let's have a little of your story, because you have a really interesting backstory. Your grandmother immigrated from Cuba, is that right? And
my grandma, my mom, and my dad. Or sorry. My grandma, my mom, and my aunt
okay.
came here from Cuba in the late '60s during something that was called the Freedom Flights,
Yep.
which were,
So you grew up in Miami and you were in the band?
Yeah. So I grew up in Orlando.
I'm sorry, Orlando. Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up going to Miami a lot
Sure.
because my family was there in Hialeah. But I grew up in Orlando. I went to the Osceola County School for the Arts here in Central Florida, where
Give them a little
where
shout out. Yay.
shout out the band and everybody.
Right?
And it was there that I played the drums, played jazz drums, and really that school helped shape who I am and kind of learning about music, organizing, everything like that. And so I owe a lot to that school because I wasn't always the best behaved kid growing up. And I think having something to really channel my energy helped me learn how to, be effective. And, the arts are so incredibly unique because not everyone who does an art program is going to become an artist, right? Or well, they're all artists when you start playing, but it's not gonna be their career. But what the arts do is it teaches you, you're learning how to learn, and you're also learning soulcraft. And when you learn soulcraft, I think the transfer value is like, the sky's the limit as far as the potential. And so I'm a huge advocate for arts education, arts industry, and just ensuring that culture and arts are placed centerpiece in society because it's important, and it's an avenue to get more people involved in civics and government.
I think we as a nation are one of the countries that does not really value the arts enough. I mean, all you hear about in Florida now is STEM, 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 and you see what they're doing to New College. Not that that's an arts college, but it's a liberal arts college. But I've read what you've said about music being an important part of your life, and music was a really important part. It still is an important part of my life too. I was in a blues band. I played bass, so back in the day.
Hey, that's awesome.
Yeah. I had a 3/4 neck Gibson. Anyways, but that was back in another life. So tell us about how you got to Congress, and I want to hear about, like, have you found an apartment yet? Because that was a thing. You couldn't didn't have any housing. I mean, geez.
Yeah, so I feel incredibly well, number one, yes, I do have housing. So
Okay, yay.
everybody knows I have an apartment. I'm spreading the news because the top question I get is, have you found a place to live?
I'm sorry.
No. Everyone's just looking out for me. That's
Yeah.
great. And I appreciate everybody. And I just want everyone to know I found the place, and now it's time to work on everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you found a place. how did you end up running for Congress? I know, again, you've told this story a lot, but for our listeners, it's their first time hearing from you directly, and I hope you are a frequent guest on our show. But just to give us a little bit of background on how you wound up being the first Gen Zer in Congress from Florida.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because number one, so early 2021, I was asked for some friends, organizers locally. They said, hey, you should look at running for this office. You should look at running for Congress, for Valdeming seat. And originally I was like, I said hell no. I mean, that's what I originally said. I said no, and because I think a lot of times we internalize things said about us, or just internalize what the world would have you think. And so a lot of the things that
It's a
my opponent.
lot. I mean, running for Congress, it's a lot. You're a young guy, you know?
It is a lot because it's a full-time job. I quit my job at the time. I was the national organizing director at March for Our Lives,
Uh-huh.
and so people know, because I think sometimes people. Um, it's funny because I think my parents just started understanding what my job was in organizing,
And then
then
you
I.
left it.
But yeah, it's a joke with organizers. Their parents just never fully understand. They're like, "Wait, are you making money? Are you volunteering
Right.
on the campaigns?" And so people know. I was a national organizing director at March for Our Lives, which is a nonprofit that came out of the shooting that happened in Parkland, Florida. And I was a department head. I ran the organizing department, our largest department, a large staff, a large budget. It was my job, um, and uh, and I quit that job to run for Congress. And it took a lot for me to do that because I'd worked hard to get to a place where I was able to like run my own organizing program. And working at March for Our Lives was just a dream, like working with young people, getting to be creative and in our actions and what we were doing. And I got to travel a lot to work with people across the country. But I decided to, run for office because, they planted that seed in my mind. I started speaking with people across the community, got some positive stuff, got some people who said, no, you shouldn't run. Like, to be fair, it was very mixed. But the
Well, you ran
positive.
against, let me interrupt, excuse me for interrupting, but you ran against some established, um, rep, you know, s- people who had served in the state house and the state senate, I believe, right? Wasn't in
Yeah,
your
I,
primary, and you defeated them.
yeah, it was 10 people in the primary.
Yeah.
I ran against the state senator who had been in for about 10 years, and
Mm-hmm.
two former members of Congress. And yeah, I mean, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But we found a path to victory, and I was just inspired by the calls to action and connecting with my. So I was at a crossroads. I ended up connecting with my biological mother, getting to learn about her life, and just like all of this stuff combined put me in a place where I said, I need to run for Congress. I need to run for my community, and I think we can win. And I guess I made the right decision.
You definitely won. You know, David Hogg was telling me he was one of the Marjorie Stoneman students who helped create March for Our Lives. He said that your story is so powerful and that you give him hope because, this is his quote, I imagine how many Maxes are going to be in the future that are inspired by him. And I was
Yeah.
just wondering, how does it feel to be a role model at such a young age?
Well, it's incredibly humbling, and it just means the world. And David's a close friend of mine. He was actually one of the first people to support my campaign very early on. So I have a lot of love for David, and he was with us on the ground floor, really. And it's true, right? There's a story that I always think of. There was a minister, taught every Sunday, and had a goal of kind of changing the world through his ministry. He ended up, passing away. I think just not thinking he did that, or that he had a real impact. But what he didn't realize is there was a kid who would sit in the front pew every Sunday, just kind of taking in the lessons, taking in everything. And it was his son, and that young man's name was Martin Luther King Jr. And I say that because I think a lot of times we see folks on TV or politicians, and like, it means the world to inspire people and be a role model. But I think the beautiful thing about that story is I think we all are role models and we're all inspiring people, and a lot of the time we just don't know about it. And so it's exciting to be a part of that, tradition of excellence.
That's great. Uh, I mean, yeah, Martin Luther King, that's great idol for anyone to have, especially someone who's come so far like you have. I wanted to ask you two things. First of all, what's this about steaming bagels? You're in the bagel caucus.
So
What is it about steaming bagels? You got to fill me in on that.
this whole controversy, I guess, the Bagel Gate, Bagel Gate, what happened is it was late at night, and if you follow me on Twitter, you know that in the evening times I start just posting about music and random things. And I was thinking about when I lived in Charleston, South Carolina for a year when I worked for the ACLU, and there was a place called East Side Bagel, and I think I was telling my girlfriend or someone about the fact that they steam their bagels. Like you get a bagel sandwich, and they have a steamer, and they put it in the steamer, and I always just thought it was really good. My girlfriend hated it, or she didn't hate it, but she didn't like it. But I thought it was really good, and so I just made a Twitter poll where I asked, like, how do you like your bagels? Like plain, what do you call it? Toasted or steamed? And I wasn't advocating for steamed. I just had it as an option, and then I got like canceled online. Like I got dragged because I included the option of steaming. I even said I liked steaming. I just recently have said that actually like it. But everyone's like, steamed, what's that? And I was just trying to tell everyone that it's an actual thing. Like people can Google it. Steamed bagels and steamed bagel sandwiches are a thing. And they're delicious. So either way, Dan Goldman, out of all that, made the bagel caucus. So I'm just glad to know that, steamed bagel controversy started the bagel caucus, really. And yeah, I went to that first meeting just with some printouts of articles of steamed bagels existing. And
Oh my God. I love that. Thank you so much for filling me in on the whole history
yeah,
behind Bagelgate. Let me wrap up with just asking you, now you're in Congress, what are you hoping to accomplish? What are your main priorities now that you're there? Aside from letting everyone know that steamed bagels are a thing.
so yeah, besides that very important work, our three first priorities are gun violence, housing, which Central Florida has the worst affordable housing crisis in the
Horrible.
country per capita,
Horrible.
and so that's something that I have to lead on, and something that we have to work on, and it's personal for me, and so affordable housing, and then the last priority is arts and culture, which some people might say interesting. Well, Central Florida, the bulk of our economy comes from arts and culture. Our theme parks, hospitality, um, our art centers, museums, etc. And as a musician myself, I think the arts industry is interesting because usually in places of government, when you talk about arts and music, you're only talking about arts education and copyright and like performance
Right.
rights, which are two very important things. I went to arts high school, middle school, where arts education changed my life, and I will continue to advocate for that and advocate for artists, songwriters on the copyright side. However, there's a whole other world of the industry where people don't talk about number one, independent artists, and you mentioned this, right? We're the only country, major country in the world that does not provide direct support and grants to independent artists to spur and assist American artists in their work. Canada has a really cool program called Factor that does this. And what Factor does is they provide individual direct grants to independent artists, filmmakers, whatever, to help them. It could be 200 bucks for a camera. It could be 10 grand for a tour or an album. And they've gotten into a place where for every dollar they put into this program, they get more than that back into the Canadian economy because a lot of these artists end up becoming big, and they end up spurring the economy in Canada. But the problem with their program is they lose all the IP to the United States because we have all the labels and production companies and et cetera. So imagine the impact we can have if we're able to really support independent artists support the over 5 million freelance workers in the arts that usually don't have people stepping up for them. So either way, there's a lot of, I'm getting on a soapbox. There's a lot of work that needs to be done.
I love that soapbox. My mother, she's passed away, but my mother was an artist, and I have several of her paintings in my house. And so I have a special spot in my heart for the arts as well. Well, Maxwell Alejandro Frost, it has been a great treat to have you visit with me today. And you promise you're going to come back another time and be
100%.
wearing them pants? You're going to look for the label on those pants and send it to me, okay?
Yeah, I know. I bought them. I bought them some random store in New York. I remember, and they were actually pretty cheap. So they're still holding up. But yeah, would love to come back on. I can't promise the pants, but
Okay.
if I'm at home though, I keep those in Orlando. And
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, you rocked them wherever you were.
No, thank you so much.
Thanks again for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon, okay?
Talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs LLC and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.